America's Cold War, Chapter 8, A New Cold War, Part 6, Enter Reagan. The rise of the Committee of the Present Danger could not have come at a better time for one of its founding members, Governor Ronald Reagan of California, who by early spring of 1980 had secured the Republican Party's nomination for president. A longtime Hollywood actor, Reagan in the 1940s had been a New Deal Democrat. By the 1950s, he moved steadily rightward, especially after becoming a corporate spokesman for General Electric. He gained national political attention with his televised speech in support of Barry Goldwater in 1964, and with his election to the California governorship 2 years later. In 1976, he battled Gerald Ford for the GOP nomination. Now, 4 years later, he was the party's standard bearer. Americans frustrated by the ability of the radical Islamist regime to continue to hold U.S. hostages in Tehran and thereby thumb its nose at American power, were delighted by Reagan's full-throated demand that the United States once again stand tall. In the same way, his promise to increase military spending massively appealed to defense contractors and blue-collar workers in their factories, as well as those convinced that a major hike in military spending would lift the nation out of its economic doldrums. Nor did it hurt Reagan that, though more than a decade older than Carter, he came off as younger and more energetic. He campaigned as a vigorous, optimistic alternative to his cautious, seemingly unimaginative opponent. As a leader who could, all by himself, make it morning in America. It was, some noted, 1960 all over again. Well, not exactly. While Eisenhower had refused to give in to the Democratic's alarmism back then, Carter, prompted by Brzezinski and other political advisors, including his pollster, Pat Cattle, was not so resolute. He had already declared the Carter Doctrine in response to Afghanistan. Soon afterward, he announced that the United States would also boycott the Summer Olympic Games, to be held in that year in Moscow, and would suspend grain sales to the USSR. The president also gave up on securing congressional ratification of SALT II, recognizing that whatever its contribution to world peace and stability, an arms control deal with the Soviet Union would probably cost him rather than help him in the election that fall. In July, Carter authorized Presidential Directive 59, a startling strategy statement that commissioned the building of new tactical nuclear weapon systems and seemed to endorse limited nuclear war. Carter's stunning affirmation of such a position is only one of the most vivid examples of how forays into nuclear strategy during the second half of the Cold War often represented political rather than strategic considerations. The president surely had not come around to the idea that a limited nuclear war was somehow winnable. Rather, developing the kind of aggressive strategy articulated by President PD-59 was a ready means of demonstrating his toughness to the electorate and to influential voices inside the Beltway. As the November election neared, he threatened the Soviet Union with action should it invade Poland, where a new anti-communist solidarity trade union movement was staging mass demonstrations. More and more, domestic political imperatives encroached on foreign policy. No longer could Brzezinski claim, as he once did, that the worst thing you could say to President Carter was, "It would be good for us politically." No longer could it be argued that Carter, determined to promulgate a moral and confident American foreign policy in a world passing the Soviet Union by, would disavow the game of alarmist Cold War politics. On the contrary, after the invasion of Afghanistan, he played the game with relish. In the space of 12 months, the president adopted one anti-Soviet policy after another, authorizing new weapon systems, isolating the USSR diplomatically, and outdoing his critics in exaggerating the dangers now facing the country. But Carter's move to the right was far for naught, and may have played into Reagan's hands by seeming to substantiate the Republicans' own alarmist claims. Aided by John Anderson's liberal third-party candidacy, which cut into Carter's support, Reagan won the election with considerable room to spare. To add insult to Carter's injury, mere minutes after Reagan was sworn in, the hostages were released into U.S. custody, the Khomeini government having concluded that it would gain nothing by continuing the standoff. The new president arrived in office in early 1981, which set views on how the United States should contend with the Soviet Union and international communism. Fully in line with CPD thinking, he wanted to divide the world cleanly again into black and white, with the Soviet Union and its allies on one side, and the United States and its allies, no matter how distasteful some of them might be, on the other. His Secretary of State, Alexander Haig, was a vociferous critic of Carter's and Brzezinski's belief that the bipolar Cold War should be de-emphasized in favor of managerial trilateralism. The confrontation with Moscow, Haig asserted, should return to the center stage of world politics. Haig rejected reports of Soviet decline and scoffed at the Kremlin's repeated demands for a new détente as so much subterfuge. Other hardliners in the Reagan administration agreed. At a time when secret CIA and other estimates showed the Kremlin to be facing severe economic decline, to be losing support among its own people and the populations of Eastern Europe, and to be falling farther and farther behind the United States in advanced military technologies, influential voices in the administration suggested with a straight face that the USSR, in fact, stood on the verge of Cold War supremacy. Reagan bought these claims more or less down the line. He adhered to a few core principles, the first being a deep and unyielding anti-communist that had dictated his political worldview for decades and served as the bedrock to his campaign. A second principle, and a main reason for his appeal to voters, was a basic and essential optimism about the capacity of American power and ideals to solve problems in the world and bring about positive change. Even in the early months of his administration, he was troubled by the continuing specter of mutually assured destruction, and the widespread notion that the Cold War would last for many more decades. Surely, he thought, there had to be another way to prevail. This, in turn, connects to another aspect of Reagan's temperament, his pragmatism. Little noticed by most critics as well as many supporters at the time, it had in fact emerged with regularity during his time as governor. For example, his conservative rhetoric did not keep him from signing one of the nation's most liberal abortion laws. Together, these elements of the new president's personality explain both his aggressive policies towards the Soviets in his first term and his unwillingness in his second to respond affirmatively to Kremlin leader Mikhail Gorbachev's call for Soviet-American conciliation and new thinking in global politics. End of part 6.